Hi, my name is Arian Barentz, and this is American History Unit 7. And today I'm going to be talking about Abigail Adams, who was involved in the very first women's rights movements of the 1800s. Abigail Adams was not only involved in women's rights before the actual movement, she also was the wife and first lady for President John Adams. He was the 6th president of the United States. And during his time as president, the War of Independence was going on. And Abigail Adams is known for writing her husband and President John Adams letters asking him to remember the ladies. History also remembers Abigail Adams as one of the first women's rights activists. The women's rights movement didn't officially begin until 1848, but Abigail foreshadows via some of her letters to her husband, noting the rise in women's power and activity, stating that they would not be silenced, that they would be heard. Although Abigail died in 1818, which would be 30 years before the official beginning of the women's rights movement, again, she quoted her husband several times in letters to him asking him to remember the ladies. In the 1800s, women were not seen in the light that we are today. Several advancements have been made in women's rights during that movement. However, in the 1800s, women were seen and not heard. They typically stayed at home and managed their families, and men were the ones that would go away and earn money for the household and be kind of the voice for the family, deciding what was best. As I mentioned before, in some of the letters that Abigail had written, she foreshadows particularly women's rights movement, by quote saying, "If particular attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation." And what that basically is saying is that she's pretty much telling her husband, hey, if we're not taking into consideration, women's views and women's voices, during the creation of these laws and codes of conduct for the United States, then there's going to come a time when women are going to rise up, when women are going to rise up and let their voices be heard. Women's rights today, much like she foreshadowed, there was the women's rights movements that began in the 1800s. But has continued on up and through today. Much like women today in political views, Abigail was a woman not of politics, but was the first lady. So by the same regard, she was much into politics as her husband was. She just could not voice her opinions and be heard the way that her husband was. Much like Abigail had begun, women today should be put in charge of women's rights. Much like Abigail had started to say, if we can't speak for ourselves, who is going to speak for us? And to relate that back, she was a first lady as well, much like Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama, who we can put a face with a name today and cite them as people that are the voices for women that don't have that platform to speak their views and to let women's rights and activists be heard. Women's views should be not dictated, but by a woman. Women know what women need, much like men know what men need, and so on and so forth. But we should be validated at the same time, much as men are, for their views and their thoughts as well. For example, pay equality. In today's society, men are paid more, sometimes twice as much as women are for the same job. For instance, via U.S. and magazine, there was an article recently regarding Hilary Swank, who is an American actress, who was offered $500,000 for her role in an upcoming movie versus her male co-star, which was offered $100 million. So right there, that's a pretty good example of how the equality in pay in this regard relates to women's rights as well. And lastly, the election of 2016, we do have an opportunity for the very first time in American history for a woman to become the United States president. She believes in women's rights and is picking up and continuing on the tradition, much like Abigail did back in the 1800s. It's time for a woman to speak for women and let our voices be heard, and so we can all become equal, whether we are man, woman, what nationality we are. Regardless of all of our standings, we should all be viewed as equal in the United States. That's a freedom that so many have fought for and died for. And it may have begun with Abigail Adams, but it continues on within each woman today. And Hillary Clinton is just a prime example of a voice, a face, and a name, much like Abigail Adams was in history. Thank you for listening today, and I hope that I was able to provide you with some information regarding women's rights, and I hope that we can continue to grow as a country and as individuals and view each other as equals regardless of our circumstances. So 2016, I'm with her, Hillary Clinton for president, and go Tribe. Believeland. Thank you.